Hello, welcome back to Lessons from a Podcaster. Today here with me, Dan. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Tiago? Very nice to meet you.
So, going from the VC world to become a full-time podcaster, tell me why did you decide to do that transition?
Yeah, Tiago, it's a good question. Well, the interesting thing is, when I started in VC, it was more of like an internship apprenticeship at a fund called V Venture Partners. But yeah, so it was more like a contract with them, and I was just scrambling to get a job. The pandemic happened, and throughout my time at VC, I met a really good friend of mine who became a mentor and eventual business partner, Earl Valencia. He uh, he had mentioned that he wanted to write a book, and me having an English degree and also having Filipino roots, I just said, "Yo, dude, I'd love to help you out with the book in any way I can." And fast forward to 4 years or 5 years it is that now we're here and talking about the podcast, and the book was originally the inspiration for the podcast. But yeah, after that, you realize that you can make money with something, and you just have to make a corporation out of it.
Mhm. So, what is the podcast about? Do us the 30 seconds pitch challenge.
Man, yeah, the podcast is about anything entrepreneurship. Really, we just speak to founders sometimes, and a lot of the times there's a lot of interesting nooks and crannies into entrepreneurship as to like why somebody wants to start a business and grow it. But yeah, it's really just about following your passion and trying to monetize it and make it a career. But yeah, it's it's about a lot of things. Recently, we interviewed somebody who by the name of Dorothy Chang. She runs an organization called Links Collective, and she used to work for this thing called Code of Colossi, which is a big nonprofit. And yeah, it's really just about the guests, really. But if I had to
Mm,
say, it's really unpacking like what makes somebody an entrepreneur, and like what is entrepreneurship really, because we
mm.
on Instagram will see a lot of these highlights where somebody's just flipping clothes or like, making a quick profit, but it's really more into that than just
Yeah.
the things that people choose to share.
And what is the name?
Yeah, called Startup Mindsets Podcast on Spotify and Apple and YouTube now.
Perfect.
Also,
So you before we were talking a little bit, and you told me that you actually used the book as use the podcast, sorry, as a way to do some research for the book and interview some guests that then help the book. By the way, what's the name of the book?
it's also called Startup Mindsets.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did you use the podcast as a way to do some research?
we just had a idea to write the book first, and I guess the podcast we needed to remember what people said, and we were going to record them anyway. And I had no experience of like editing,
Yeah.
audio or video, but or maybe I did have a little, but yeah, we just did that a couple times. I mean, back in 2020 around this time, so close to 4 year anniversary for that.
What was the biggest lesson after interviewing all these entrepreneurs? What was something that you were surprised to learn?
That's a good question, man. And it's funny because I ask that question to people, but don't realize how hard it is to answer. I'd say the biggest lesson that I've learned from talking to all these smart folks is just that you got to believe in yourself. I think that too many times in this world we get bought into the idea that you have to follow the leader when really you are the leader of your life. So I think it's really just that. I think entrepreneurship is being your leader and a leader of people. But it really just starts with you. I mean, it ends with you too. So I think
Mm,
it's just that no matter how difficult something can get, it's all about
mhm.
finding a good enough answer to continue.
Yeah, which is something that is often not easier said than done, right? Like to believe in yourself and follow your passion, your gut. Is there any strategy, any ways that someone can actually train that to become more self-confident?
Man, that's such a really good question. I think that I was thinking about this kind of we have physical habits, and then we also have mental habits. But once you do something difficult, you start to build a confidence in yourself. I think it's really just, and it goes back to something that somebody I interviewed by the name of Simon Alexander Ong. He said something like, once you become one with your identity, then you'll be able to do all these things, right? If you don't really see yourself as a CEO or as an author,
Mm,
and of course it's hard to do that at first because you just started, and but um, I think you just have to be able to believe you are that person and once you do, you could see that you could continue on a path. Because if you struggle with, like, for example, if like you do a podcast and it doesn't get the results you want, like the views or maybe like the, I don't know, like the money that you initially want, then you might want to quit, right? But like if you see yourself as somebody who has the ability to do that in the first place, then I think something could work out.
So if I want to be a podcaster, the first thing I should do is to tell myself and convince myself that I am a podcaster, even if I if I don't have my mic or my first interview. If I convince myself that I'm a podcaster, that is already a great first step towards achieving my goal.
You're in the big leagues, man. We're on Zencaster.
So tell me one thing. You were talking a little bit before that you have a lot of guests. Your podcast is only about all about interviewing people, and you actually make some money out of that, which is very interesting. And I think a lot of our listeners would love to learn more on how you do that. So PR companies reach out to you, they pitch guests,
Hmm.
and they offer you a rate, or you offer a rate. How does that work?
Yeah, typically they'll just reach out and not offer a rate, but that's where the business comes in. I mean, you just have to say that this is my rate, and it's take it or
So
leave
they
it.
don't even ask you. So they because I get a lot of these emails.
Uh-huh.
Often they are very spammy. Often
Uh-huh.
they say, "Hey, I listened to this episode of yours," and then normally they just pick some random one. And I love how, and some
Yeah.
abstract, generic thing that they loved about that interview, and they said, "Here is a guest that might you might want to interview." They never tell me about, okay, we'll actually that happened already once or twice. Like I will pay you this. Uh,
Hmm.
so do they ask you and in advance, or they tell you in advance they are going to pay you for it, or do you ask?
Yeah, I ask the majority of the time. I think that
Mm.
yeah, more majority of the time I ask, but I mean, in the cases where I hit people up, I don't ask them to pay. But
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
it's like sometimes you'll get asked to interview like a venture capitalist or a $1 million CEO, and you can't just you got to
Yeah,
ask for a couple $100, man. It's like
yeah.
it's like I can't do
You
this
gotta
for free.
ask. Yeah. How much do you ask normally?
Just a couple $100. I think it depends, but right now, yeah, the flat rate. If anybody's listening and wants, and is a PR agency, or I don't know, just wants to be on the podcast, it's going to be $500 US.
Okay, that's really good. That's really good. And what does come with the package? So they pay you 500, you interview them. What do they get?
Sure, yeah, they get their brand and their name in front of an entrepreneurial audience. Right now, we have I think like 250 followers on Spotify, but growing that, and then yeah, they just, I mean, they get a lot of PR maybe, or affiliation with a top podcast that's got a really successful history of interviewing.
Hmm.
I mean, you could call it successful people, but I think just I think they get their story out there. I was struggling to figure out what did they get, but I spoke to a good friend of mine by the name of Ravi Kurani. He told me that yeah, you provide people with a voice, and I think like in this crowded, diluted markets, it's hard to get your voice out there. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's just that they get a lot of visibility and impressions to
Mhm.
whatever the company is, and you know um, it's, I guess it's a marketing angle.
Yeah. And do you feel that because they are paying you for, being a guest, that the content of the episode becomes a little bit one-sided and a little bit too spammy or only around their brand, or are they generically interesting and just, create good content for your podcast?
I think it's a majority. Yeah, I try to make it as interesting as I can, of course, but yeah, I'd say that it doesn't. I would say I don't treat anybody who pays versus that doesn't
Mhm.
pay any different. Yeah, I think just to make good content, it has to be something that it depends on what you define as good content, right? Because the algorithm will say it's not good content, but you could think it's good content, and
Yeah. What
yeah,
what
but
is good content for you then?
I'd say good content is like it has a message that relates to people, really. But I mean, that's
Mm.
the objective answer. But then there's like obviously, does it lead you to more downloads and all this stuff, which is hard to track to begin with. But
Mhm.
I think good content is just being authentic, really.
Yeah. What is the preparation you do to make sure that you'll in the end have an episode with a good message that relates to people?
I think I used to prepare more often when I was an early podcaster when I didn't know how things would go. But after you do like 120 of these, it's just you read a little bit about the person and you kind of educate yourself on the subject. But it varies, right? Because some things I'll know and like some things I won't know. Like sometimes people are um, easier to interview than others. But I think it's just I prepare by I think I'd prepare by just trying to be in the zone, right? Like I think like as an NBA player, somebody will prepare by warming up, but
Hmm.
I think yeah,
What's
just
your
make
warm up?
what is my form? Nothing, man. I just show up and, and hit record. But
Yeah.
no, I think there is a warm up. I think for some of these things, you try to do them in person. You definitely want to look your best and not, you know, um, be unprepared. So I think it's just, yeah, I guess getting mentally ready, or sometimes
Hmm.
just not, not, just having that focus.
Hmm. What was the hardest interview you had to do so far?
That's a good question too, man. I interviewed somebody who used to be a faculty at Harvard Business School, and he was just so smart. And I think one of the things was trying to match like the level of the conversation, because I think like sometimes somebody will talk, very highly, right? And like you try to
Mhm.
speak with the same amount of like not fancy words or big words, but just trying to. I think that was a
Match
mistake.
their vocabulary.
Match the
Yeah,
vocabulary or
yeah.
like what do you call that? Seem as smart as them or whatever. But
Hmm.
I've interviewed some smart people who have done some cool things, and I think it's just we're all humans at the end of the day. There's no
Hmm.
real like even if somebody has a PhD or whatever, like
Yeah.
I actually just interviewed somebody who has a PhD, but it just try to make the conversation as natural as you can.
Hmm.
Although you could get lost in their answers too, which is something I tried not to do.
Hmm. And in the end of the interview, do you try to somehow network with them? How do you stay in touch with them? And as well, how do you, once the
Yeah,
episode is published, you communicate that to your guests?
that is a good question, Tiago. I'd
Thank you.
say, yeah, definitely. I mean, already having their email address most of the time, but yeah, I think I definitely do. Depends on, but yeah, just I guess trying to stay in touch with them and tell them that the podcast is out, or if you're in town, we'll grab a drink or something, right? Like, I interviewed somebody who runs like this bureau of small projects down in Los Angeles, and he told me, yeah, after the if I'm ever out in LA, just to hit him up and we'll grab lunch. But I think there's more to networking than that. You could have a very big business idea and you need their help because they know people or they're really successful and they like you for some or they if you have rapport, then you can definitely do something. But yeah, I mean, I think
Mhm.
a recent person I interviewed, she runs a links collective in New York, and I was asking, yeah, if once I publish the book, if I could do a book tour or do a book event with them, and they were super willing to do so. I think it's
Cool.
sometimes in the past it would have been, can I work at your company, or can I invest in your company, or things like that. But it's always contingent on kind of your situation as well. I mean,
Mhm.
and what you can give to them too. But it's no guarantees, right? That's business. There's no
Yeah,
guarantees, and
totally. What do you think of podcasting for businesses? Do you think that's something that more and more businesses will integrate into their marketing toolkit, or do you think it's dying out? Like, what do you think? Where do you think the podcasting industry is going in the next 2 to 3 years?
man, that's a good question. I feel like I've seen like with the so much like saturation of content that the listenership could be going down for some people. But as a business, I mean, to be able to provide an angle that's like unbiased and not trying to sell you some shitty product or whatever, right? Like if you're the most boring brand, like you're a brand of soap, whatever, I think you could have a podcast like Dove could definitely speak about how they're soap or whatever cleaning supplies they have.
How to
Yeah,
clean
how
your
it works
skin.
on people because I never thought of that, and now I'm
Hmm.
thinking like maybe I should be using different soap or these are things that no one would really speak about in the mainstream media.
Yeah,
So it's definitely a cool
true.
idea.
You can bring a new angle to people's lives that they don't normally don't get in other alternative
And you
mediums.
you would think that
Totally
would be
true.
boring,
Yeah,
right? But there's definitely
yeah,
a lot of people want to
yeah,
listen to like
yeah.
how
Totally.
body.
Dan, thank you so much. Tell us again the name of your podcast and how can people reach out to you.
Most definitely, Tiago. Yeah, it's called Startup Mindsets Podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, also startupmindsets.com. I'm at dan.podcast on Instagram. And yeah, looking forward to that. If you're listening, I'm publishing a book with Penguin Southeast Asia. And yeah, would love to have you read it. And, it's been a great time here, Tiago.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan, and all of your links will be in the show notes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.